Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested by a viewer. Thanks to Haga for this one, and also to Eon Taz for providing an excellent answer in the comments. Why do some double-faced cards transform in place, and others exile themselves and return transformed? Is it just to confuse players? Why not have all the cards work the same way? Now, if you know me, you know that I'm a big templating nerd, so this question is right up my alley. And it turns out this is something that actually requires quite a bit of thought to be put into it. So let's take a look at some of the things Wizards of the Coast needs to consider when making this decision. First of all, transforming in place is always the default option. The reason is evident to anyone who's ever played a flicker effect. Exiling and returning transformed is actually pretty invasive. If the back face is a creature, it won't be able to attack the turn that it transforms this way, since it technically entered the battlefield that turn. Any counters or auras attached to that permanent would fall off, and any continuous effects, like giant growth, acting on the permanent when it's exiled will not act on the new permanent when it returns transformed. In contrast, the only thing that happens when a permanent on the battlefield transforms is that it just gets a new timestamp. There are some interesting consequences to this, and I'll refer you to my previous video on Student of the Elements and Gravity Sphere for one example. Although transforming in place is a good default, there are some cases where it makes sense to do something different. Let's talk about some of the most common reasons why. The first reason was because of the Magic Origins Flipwalkers. Anything that's a Planeswalker on the back face absolutely needs to leave the battlefield and then come back. The thing that gives Planeswalkers their starting loyalty is a replacement effect that applies as the permanent enters the battlefield. If these cards transformed in place, they would need some other way to put the appropriate amount of loyalty counters on them as part of that process. Otherwise, they would die immediately after transforming. Cards whose back face is a Saga have a similar issue. There's no rules reason why a Saga could not exist on the battlefield with no lore counters on it, but it is weird, and I think a lot of people expect that you should get the Chapter 1 ability the turn that these things transform. Like Planeswalkers, the rule that gives Sagas their first lore counter, thus triggering the Chapter 1 ability, is tied to them entering the battlefield. So if these permanents just transformed in place, then that would not happen. Speaking of, there's also a fair number of transforming double-faced permanents that are Sagas on the front face. These also tend to exile themselves and return transformed. But I think the reason why is more related to convenience. Officially, the lore counters on these permanents would remain if they just transformed in place, which a lot of people would probably either forget about or else confuse with some other kind of counters once they stopped being relevant. Bear in mind that the set these cards were from also featured the modified mechanic, meaning that stray lore counters on a creature could very well end up being relevant. Having the Saga creatures exile and return transformed is a tidy way to just make the counters go away. Finally, there's this Conquerors Gallion, which is kind of a unique case. See, the normal way to transform this card is to attack with it while it's crewed. Now here's the thing though, crewing a vehicle makes that permanent into an artifact creature until end of turn. Now if Conquerors Gallion transformed in place, then Conqueror's Foothold would start out being an artifact creature land. Now that's an issue because it would unexpectedly be vulnerable to removal spells like this Putrefy, but the bigger problem to the back half starting out as a creature would be that this half does not have a power and a toughness on it. So if Conquerors Gallion was to transform in place, it would die immediately. And then there are battles. Unlike other cards that we've talked about so far, the normal way to transform a battle is by exiling it and then casting it transformed. Now, I have no doubt Wizards of the Coast would love to have had these things transform in place, or in the case of Lazotep Convert, exile and return transformed. Unfortunately, they couldn't do that because of these two cards here. Can you see what the problem is? No? Well, have a look at their back faces. A last note before I sign off. None of these problems is insurmountable. For example, if Wizards was dead set on making a Saga that transformed into a creature, but they didn't want it to exile and return transformed, they could get the lore counters off some other way, like what we see on Heirloom Mirror. Or maybe just leave them there, like Foreboding Statue. The goal of templating is to have the shortest, clearest wording that makes it as easy as possible for people to understand what the cards do, while still letting them function as intended within the rules. Just because there is one known solution that works well, that doesn't mean another solution couldn't exist. Deciding which one to use is all about trade-offs. Now, if this sort of thing interests you, check out my video on the theoretical and philosophical aspects of templating for a lot more. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.